The other thing is, he talked about ice. So yeah, so just like when I send patients home, if they have a little bit of pain, I don't care. If they came in with 8 out of 10 low back pain and it's down to 3 out of 10 low back pain, could I put electrical stimulation, ice, some kind of Bengay, whatever, tape, whatever on it to cover up the rest of the pain? Yes. I don't want to do that because I want them to go home and use the exercises that I gave them to make it better. So if they continue to get better functionally and their symptoms go away after they leave the clinic, then I know that what I did in the clinic was right and what I gave them for their program at home was correct. So we even tell people, we don't want you covering up symptoms on your own. So we don't want you doing things like, we give them this handout: no passive stretching, no massage, no orthotics, no foam rolling, no popping your joints, no Theragun. Why? Because that symptom modification that at the end of the day actually makes you worse, which we'll get into here in a second. It's coming. Hold on. Okay, here we go.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. And, you know, the recovery thing, like where you don't do massage and you don't do sauna and you don't do like cold plunge or anything like that. So this is all just to show that everything that you're doing is consistently achievable through exercise only.
Yeah, and I think it makes me work harder on the regressions and on the form quality. You know what I mean? Like I can't do things risky in my training because I'm not going to have something to go make myself feel better from it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think it's actually made me get really dialed in to, you know, the formula of what I'm doing.
Is your, do you incorporate rolling, like foam rolling or any kind of nothing?
Okay, pay very close attention here to this exchange and what Ben says here.
Nothing.
Massage ball, nothing?
Zero.
Really? So do you get sore?
I mean, I can get sore in my muscles, you know, from certain work.
You don't get like stiff back where you have to roll it out or anything?
I mean, I don't. So
really,
I haven't. I never roll or anything like that.
But you do stretch a lot, and that's
I'm big on flexibility.
Yeah,
and I think that for most people,
Okay, from here on out, when Ben says that he likes flexibility, he works on flexibility, every time he says the word flexibility, substitute range of motion for flexibility and see what happens to what he is saying.
Super passionate about is the idea of doing strength work through flexibility. So like I don't currently do any static stretching. I'm not against static stretching. Static stretching I would think of as a foundation. What I really enjoy is when my strength work and my flexibility work kind of become one and the same. So I'm trying to I'm not just trying to reach my body to a position and then strengthen a different position. I'm anywhere I can go, I want to be strong there. And I think that's why I can do the splits cold, or I can be playing basketball and then do the splits or these kind of things and not have to worry about tweaking something because I'm getting strong in those nooks and crannies. So
okay, so I'm going to push pause right here because there's a lot to unpack. So did you hear what Ben said when Joe said, so you don't get stiff and you don't like have to foam roll and you don't have to massage? And he said, no, I don't need that. So the question here is Joe getting stiff and tight because of his recovery? Which the answer would be yes, because what he's using for recovery when he's talking about foam rolling and the lacrosse ball and the Theragun and the massage and the stretching, he's causing neuromuscular inhibition, which turns the muscle off. So as soon as that muscle that he just turned off gets in a shortened position, there's now no more regulation from the central nervous system. And the only thing that muscle knows how to do is to get tight. So he might feel increased range of motion, increased flexibility right after he does it, which is why he's doing it. But long-term, he's making himself tighter, which is why he keeps on doing the recovery stuff. All right. So if you listen to Ben, what did he say? I like to work on my strength through flexibility. So replace range of motion in there, take out flexibility, put in range of motion. And what does he say? I like to work on my strength through range of motion. That's what he means. So his definition of flexibility, and he'll get to it here in a second, is completely wrong. And here's where, as professionals, we have to be very, very focused on our terminology. So we can't redefine words. Okay, we can't just say flexibility is range of motion. That's the same thing. It's not. So if you look up the definition of flexibility, flexibility is the absolute range of motion a joint can go through with or without external forces. Okay, that's from Webster's or Wikipedia, somewhere where I got that. Okay, the absolute range of motion regardless of control. That is dangerous. That is how you get hurt. What Ben is saying, every time he says flexibility, he's saying range of motion. Listen to him carefully, which is correct. If you train through a full range of motion, if you strength train through a full range of motion, you increase range of motion because you're increasing the proprioception in those end ranges of motion. So when he talks about nooks and crannies, he says it several times. Nooks and crannies means he's getting to the end range of motion and he's training getting in and out of those positions. So if you train your body to do that proprioceptively and you develop strength in those nooks and crannies, that's how you perform better. That's how you become safe when you perform. That's what he is talking about. So when he talks about how he doesn't get tight because he's going through a full range of motion. Okay. Okay, so let's jump back into where we left off here. Same thought process. Every time he says flexibility, replace it with range of motion and think about what Joe is saying about his recovery.
Get strong while you're doing splits. Like, what are you doing to get you strong in those positions?
If you go to the fourth post, you'll see my favorite exercise. So the top 3 posts I put is only about the sled. That's how important I think the sled is. If you look at the, so you're going to see on this.
Let's give me some volume on this, Jamie, so I can hear what he says and give me a refresh.
The oil that delivers nutrients into the. So this one's about full range of motion. Once I get into the exercise, notice my back leg. All I want you to watch on this one is the back leg. I do this every Monday of my life.
Through greater risk or pain. It's actually regressing to
so this would be a super low level where you're bending the knee. But watch what happens. The back hip flexor starts stretching. Now when you do this flat ground without the back knee touching the floor,
avoiding a joint is easier short term.
Your hip flexors get very flexible. But I'm using the joint. I'm handling my body weight.
It's repeat.
So I'm not just sitting there stretching with my back knee on the ground.
Listen to this. Listen.
I'm actively lengthening through that back hip flexor.
Got it. That's
so if you think about a split,
you
can lengthen through that back hip flexor with that full range of motion split squat. And then in that front hamstring, I do things like Romanian deadlifts, but where the intent is only on getting that stretch every rep. Like I'm not sacrificing the weight.
Romanian straight leg?
Yeah, like a straight legged deadlift, like that kind of thing. But where I'm not sacrificing, I'm not trying to go heavier and shortening up. You see what I mean? Meaning every rep, you're trying to get the best range of motion you can. And then you may have seen me do that Jefferson curl thing where I curl my body and I reach my hands like down below my toes.
Yes.
Okay. So if you look at the angles of those, and if you look at the angles of that ass to grass split squat, that full range of motion split squat on the back hip flexor, you can actually approximate the angles like of a front split through only strength training. So that's I don't static stretch personally. I use static stretching in my system as an optional basis, but what I'm trying to do is figure.
Now, how much better would his system be if he got rid of the option of stretching and actually educated people why he doesn't stretch? So that's my question for him. Why would he recommend that to his participants when he himself doesn't have to do it? He's already learned that you don't need to stretch. So why is he making it optional?
Even when it gets into my groin area, like, like a butterfly stretch. I hold weights on my knees and I strengthen my groin. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no,
So
a lot of guys in martial arts
it's
do that
not
as well.
max out lifting, but the idea is that I'm going to be strong and capable in all these nooks and crannies.
When you do this butterfly stretch thing, do you hold a dumbbell in each hand?
Exactly,
and
on
put
each
the
knee.
weight on each knee, and then do you lift the knees up?
Exactly. So then I use my groin muscles to lift the weights.
Is there a video of that?
No, I don't have that one.
So you do that, and that allows you to increase your flexibility because you're actually pushing down with the knee, with the weight.
Exactly.
And then also strengthening it.
Exactly. So for me, I was extremely stiff, and I found that if I just stood,
So here's another substitution. He doesn't mean he's stiff. He means he's tight. Okay. So he found out, he's going to talk about here, before he trained through a full range of motion, he was getting tight. Then once he figured out to train through a full range of motion with resistance, he got bigger range of motion.
Aid static stretching, I would get some benefit, but I would like tighten back up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And here's another example where like there's no studies on your groin injury from having a strong and flexible groin from this exercise we're talking about right now. You know what I mean? Like it's that it could be 20, 30 years or more before something like that is in a textbook. But I'll tell you this much, when your groin is flexible and strong and you go play sports, like all past evidence would indicate if an area is stronger and more flexible, you have actually like way less chance of injury. So there seems to be like.
So what did he just say there? What he meant to say is if it is strong and it has full range of motion, now you can perform. Now you're strong.
There's an exponential thing going on when it comes to strength and flexibility being in harmony versus either being strong but stiff or flexible but weak. You see what I'm saying?
100%, because I've heard the argument that you can be too flexible because it can make you less stable. And people have said that to me, and I was like, oh boy, is that like?
But it goes the wrong way, and they
throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Exactly. So saying, because I get athletes all the time, they see me, dunk and do a splits or something, and that's why I'm doing that is to stand up for flexibility, because the amount of young basketball players who are scared to get flexible because they think it'll take away their jumping ability or something. It's like you said, throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
I've heard guys say that in martial arts about fighting.
Right. Basketball players are suffering a lot of injuries because they're way too tight. They're tight. They're tight and weak. So they're worried about getting flexible when really the problem is they're weak and inflexible, and they need to be getting more.
So here's the correct way to say this. They are tight because they are weak. If they had normal facilitation, normal strength, they would have normal range of motion. So if you are strong, you have normal facilitation, you have full range of motion. If you are tight, you lack range of motion, you're fighting yourself. It's because your body is weak, not strong.
Well, and stronger. You see what I mean?
So is this a myth? It's a myth. It's going around in the basketball community?
Big time.
So is that in football as well, or baseball?
Definitely. Yeah.
So they all think that to be flexible somehow or another makes you less fast?
Exactly.
Really?
Yes. Even though there's it's like if you just take an area and you don't do any, strengthening through that range, and you just, I guess, passively push it through stretches. You know what I mean? I don't think you or I thinks that's going to make you athletic, but the idea then to think that flexibility makes you slow is just false.
Let me introduce you to a real freak.
Okay, let's unpack that. The very last point was what I want to start with. So being flexible makes you slow. Correct. We know that. That is a 100% fact. If you look at the studies on stretching, unfortunately, when I got out of school, 2000, at that time, there was a ton of research that was coming out in the strength conditioning journals, the physical therapy journals, medicine journals about the effects of stretching. And what did we find out? That if you stretch a muscle, you're causing neuromuscular inhibition because you're deforming the neuromuscular junction. So the muscle cannot contract anymore. That's how you get more range of motion, more flexibility. All right. So in order to get that, you have to sacrifice something. You're sacrificing the muscle's ability to contract because you just made it relax. That's the reason why you stretched, to make it relax, to force it through more range of motion, to force flexibility. All right. So what they did is they strength tested athletes, stretched them, re-strength tested. Strength went down, had them do a vertical jump, stretch, redo vertical jump went down, ran a 40, stretch, run another 40, 40 got slower. Took Army recruits, ran them through a battery of tests before they went to boot camp. Guess which recruits failed boot camp the most? The ones that had the most flexibility. The ones that did the best on flexibility tests were the ones that didn't make it through boot camp because of injury. If you look at what the studies on single leg stance is very important. We just talked about how deceleration, controlling deceleration is important. So if we test single leg stance stability, balance, we stretch that person, retest it, their balance and stability suffers because of the stretching. So we know for a fact that if you stretch, your performance level goes down. So they were wrong in the last part of that. All right, let's go back to the beginning. So when they're talking about doing weighted butterflies, so with my dancers, when I tell them, I don't want you to stretch, I do not want you to foam roll, I don't want you to get a massage gun, get rid of all that stuff. We're going to substitute something else. What do we substitute? Strength at the end range of motion. So the butterflies that they were talking about, I have my patients sit on the ground, do butterflies, put your hands on top of your knees and push into your hands with your adductors. Hold that 5 seconds, flip over, put your hands on the outside of your knees, push out, contracting your glutes, hold that 5 seconds, go back and forth. What happens to their butterfly? Range of motion gets bigger because flexibility decreased, because we increased strength. So here's the important part. When you want motion, you have to increase strength, which will give you stability through the range of motion. So then you have motion, strength, and stability, which is MoStreBility. If you have all three of those things together, you're safe and you perform your best. When you sacrifice strength by stretching to force flexibility, now you decrease performance, increase risk of injury. Okay. So yes, you can be too flexible. When you are tight, that means you are weak. Your body is telling you, if you're tight and you can't touch your toes, your body is telling you, I'm not doing that because I haven't been in that position under load before, so I can't go through that range of motion and be safe. So I'm going to guard because I don't have proprioceptive ability in the range of motion that you're trying to put me in. Okay, that's why they get tight. So you can increase flexibility by stretching them, rolling them, massaging them, or you can reverse neuromuscular inhibition, which will increase their motion immediately, but it'll also increase their strength. So when we test somebody with the dynamometer and see that they're weak and test their range of motion and then refacilitate normal neuromuscular facilitation, retest their strength, strength goes up, range of motion increases because of motion, strength, and stability. So with our dancers, I don't take away something and then say, don't go do anything for warm-up. We say, we're replacing all of your passive things. Anything that's passive, we are getting rid of. We are letting your body control what it needs to control. I'm not going to dictate what your body must do because I think I know more than your body. That's what you're doing when you force flexibility. All right. And then the other thing they talked about when I said they're screwing up stiffness and tightness. So tightness is the sign of weakness, the sign of inhibition. Stiffness is an imperative. You have to have muscle and joint stiffness if you want to perform well, if you want to avoid injury, because stiffness is the ability to change direction, is the ability to absorb force, is the ability to decelerate and then go the other way immediately. So when you're stiff, you have a very short amortization window. So think about this when they're talking about jumping. If you land from a jump and want to jump right away, Amortization is the phase between the eccentric loading and the concentric explosion coming back up. You want that phase to be as short as possible. And the way you get that is to increase stiffness in the muscle and the joint, because now it means that muscle is firing like this versus going, okay, I think I might fire. Okay, now you're not controlling deceleration and now you have injury. All right. So stiffness is a must. Tightness is what we want to avoid. All right, let's jump back into these guys.
All over the world, but a lot of it is in Asia.
Yeah, you don't have to be flexible to be athletic, but if you're like me and you lack explosion, period, and you're stiff and weak, well, then if you're going to try to get explosive, the ability to open up flexibility and strength, you can then just
Look at this.
Yeah.
Like, what the fuck, man?
Yep.
This guy's doing a split in between two boxes, full side split, like more than 100% flexibility, because he's past the range of motion that you would normally associate with someone's legs and hamstring stretches.
Yeah.
It's wild.
So I would tell someone to think about flexibility as access. So flexibility is like access to get stronger into different areas.
Yeah.
Boom. There you go right there. There is the definition of range of motion, not flexibility. So every time he says flexibility, he means range of motion. Access to get into the position. That is range of motion.
And arguably the best bodybuilding legs ever. So like we're talking about like the most muscular legs.
Tom Platz.
Yeah. But have you seen his flexibility?
No.
Look, type in Tom Platz flexibility and you're going to see him doing the thing I was doing on the floor.
Really?
So it should be Tom Platz MoStreBility, because the reason why he has what they're going to show here is because bodybuilders train through a full range of motion.
So it has legs are as big as my whole body.
You'll see actually pictures of him doing that thing where you're fully laying back with the quads fully stretched out, crazy hamstring flexibility.
Wow, I did not know that.
So flexibility is access. If you're like, I'm not going to tell someone who's doing great, like, oh, you don't need to do anything. You don't even have to quote unquote exercise. Look at the guys I mentioned back at the start in the forestry industry who are essentially probably exercising better than most people exercise. They're
for the fucking look at those legs.
Yeah.
Bro, that's bonkers.
Right. But that's my point is
those legs are bonkers.
Yeah.
That does not look.
Okay. So the video that they showed of the guy at the beginning that was doing all of the splits on the boxes, that's a lot of genetics. So a lot of the reason why he can do that is genetics. The other reason is, I guarantee you, if you watch him train, he's training through a full range of motion. I guarantee you, if that guy never stretched a second in his life, never foam rolled, never got a massage, and all he did was exercise the way he exercises, he'd be able to keep on doing that stuff that he was doing. So you see what I was talking about there at the very beginning about the definition of range of motion. He means range of motion every time he says flexibility.
okay.
Yeah. Well, what's also amazing is you have you've not just applied that to the lower body, but also to the upper body, like to shoulders.
Yeah. When it comes to shoulders, elbows, wrists, I have the same goal of being quote unquote bulletproof, meaning a human body is fragile. So I'm sure as heck going to train to make it less fragile.
Right.
And there seems to be the same kind of common denominators, having range of motion, getting blood flow to the area to build up. So even with your elbow, if you are always stuck at a 90-degree angle with the elbow, you know what I mean? You never take it through a full range of motion. So yeah, it's the same concepts with the shoulders, the elbows, the wrist, training the decelerators. So, that muscle in there by the forearm, the muscle right behind your shoulder, you know what I mean? It's, if you think about like a baseball player, I've helped a lot of baseball players who thought, I won't be able to throw without shoulder pain. But if you break down the throw and you get stronger in reverse, at some point you actually can throw You see what I mean?
So by grabbing a band and pulling it back this way?
I like to use dumbbell. I like measurable.
Dumbbells?
I like something measurable.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So, yes, you get some of these similar common denominators of training areas that most people aren't thinking about because they're thinking about the performance side, not realizing that the pain and injury is the number one thing that stops you from throwing more miles per hour
Right.
or jumping higher. So when you figure out the recipe, when you figure out a sort of mathematical recipe of the action you're doing, and you can always be more bulletproof than what's needed for the action, you can keep putting out more force. You see what I mean? So like for a kick, you could probably break it down to some of these various, probably the Nordic, because it's like your leg is straightening.
Mhm.
Definitely the hip flexor, depending on how you're kicking, probably that tibialis muscle. And then of course the knee. And
Yes.
so it does, there's no absolute, but it just means that you can probably go after that a little bit harder if your strength training is accounting for those different angles.
Yeah, it completely makes sense. What about the torso? Like, what about?
So pay attention closely to here where Ben goes. Joe's going to talk about transverse plane in sports, and watch where Ben goes.
Abdominals and the lower back muscles, and because a lot of sports utilize a twisting motion of the body. Martial arts, it's like almost everything.
Yeah,
it's a twisting, particularly for striking.
Yeah,
it's gigantic aspect of your ability to generate power and speed.
I'd say there's probably three things I do a bit more unique on that. And number one is just when we think about the six pack, I'm thinking about that lifting the feet.
So watch these exercises.
I'll show you my favorite exercise for that. If you go back to that fifth post, which we've used a bunch, at the moment that I'm using the monkey foot, you're going to see my training partner lying down. He's hooked up to a cable machine.
Yes,
he's lying on his back.
Yeah.
This is like a reverse sit-up. And so like we know in my gym for males, half body weight, 20 reps, most people can't do it, but they train it for a while and then they can. It's coming up right here. Boom, there he is right there.
Yeah.
So he's hooked up to a cable stack with a measurable load trying to get his knees up. And like I'm telling you, like if you take the average male athlete and you put half their body weight and you ask them to do 20 reps, they reach a point where they cannot get their knees up.
Yeah.
They're low.
Okay, so Joe asked him a question about transverse plane training, transverse plane component of sports, kicking in particular. And Ben's go-to was a single plane exercise with no transverse plane component. So for all of the great things that Knees Over Toes does, and I love their exercises, the massive hole they have is transverse plane component. So remember, when we're talking about functional exercise that translates over to either an athlete specific sport or a specific ADL, if you got a work comp patient that needs to do something, there's certain things that their exercise has to have in order to check the boxes to make that a functional exercise. So what are those? So remember, they are